right. Good morning, everybody. Today is Friday, June 1st, 2018, and this is Before the First Cup of Jules here on UCY.TV. Happy Friday, everyone. It is an overcast 75 degrees. I think we're supposed to get some thunderstorms here later in upstate New York. So where do we leave off on Wednesday? We had Camille, who is a somewhat localish listener who does a lot of her own research on things we talk about on this show and things that she is passionate about at home. And one is clean food. And we called the show Mad Science Food Lab Farming and Sustainability Sell, because they're trying to sell these newly created meats made out of vegetable proteins and who knows what, mix it up in a petri dish and let the stem cells grow. Foods, stuff that we have never been exposed to on a grand scale, and they're trying to slip this stuff into starting out first products on the shelf, maybe even things like chicken nuggets and hot dogs, I think is what Camille had mentioned, and maybe putting them through institutional food providers for places such as prisons. The one place had schools and universities. And eventually, it'll become commonplace once they ramp up their production. One of the questions that we brought up on the show is, what is that going to do to us from a biochemical perspective? Because we don't seem to think, I know I never did until the more I dig, especially for the show, we don't tend to think that the food that we put into our mouths can make us sick or make us healthy. And that's where we're going to kick it off today. I found a story, I believe it was yesterday. This is May 29th, 2018, so it's from a few days ago, Tuesday, that caught my attention because they were sounded so surprised in the title. It says, "Woman battles cancer with diet, and Harvard researchers are now studying her approach." So it's like something that Harvard's now paying attention to, because battling cancer with diet and making sure that you get good nutrition happens to be a surprise that needs study by the medical establishment. And I wouldn't disagree with that, but on the other hand, it shouldn't be so surprising to Harvard. It surprises me that Harvard doesn't have any previous research on it. So, all right. A woman said that emphasis on her diet has helped her battle against cancer, and her new approach will be studied by researchers at Harvard University to see if maybe it can help others. Here's the thing. As we put these cultured products and laboratory farm foods, with a PH, they're supposed to be good for you, tinkered with genetically or not, fortified for your best interest, how do we know what that's going to lead to in the future? It's always plausible deniability 20, 30 years down the road once things get studied. So for Kathy Bureau, time in the kitchen is an investment in good health. This really isn't about eating healthy, Bureau says. It's about eating specific foods that fight disease. She ought to know. In 2005, doctors diagnosed her with an inflammatory breast cancer, and her prognosis was survival for 21 months. But at the time, she was 41 years old and a mother of 2 young girls, and she fought the disease with surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation. But the cancer came back, and for 11 months after her first diagnosis, she had a high-grade tumor that then came back in her head and neck. Her kidneys were failing, her liver was failing, her lungs were damaged. That's because she went the traditional route. And her heart was damaged, and her oncologist told her that she was pretty done, and she said that she was done with the protocol because one way or another I'm going to die, and I don't want to go that way. So she turned another leaf, and that's when she got off of chemotherapy and used a strategy suggested by a friend. My friend kept saying, you have to learn about anti-angiogenic foods. Anti-angiogenic foods essentially block the creation of blood vessels so cancer can't easily spread. Examples include organic vegetables such as purple potatoes, carrots, and leeks. Leeks happen to be at the top of the cancer-fighting list, which I didn't know that until I read this. Also on our list were berries, walnuts, green tea, and herbs, especially garlic. I think that's why my dad is still kicking alive and well, is because he consumes large amounts of garlic. He walks around a stinky garlic guy all the time. And when the recipe calls for 2 cloves, she says, I'm probably going to put in 6 because garlic is a really strong cancer fighter. Biro said that her diet combined with an alternative medicine called Reiki, along with meditation and visualization, worked. And don't laugh at that, because I'm going to tell you, stress, in my own investigations, stress happens to be a big trigger point for a lot of these underlying viruses. And we're going to look at some of the viral cancer connection here in a little while. But some of these underlying dormant viruses that we have in our bodies that we don't even know we're infected with because they never tested for them before, end up reawakening because of the stress response and the cortisol that is produced. And that also, the cortisol being produced constantly and always being in a stress mode, can put you into adrenal failure, which then screws up all your hormones. So it's a big, ugly ball of wax that ends up going down the spiral. So anyway, meditation, visualization, relaxation are probably all a good thing to go along with some of the anti-inflammatory foods. Today, with more than 12 years after her first diagnosis, Barrow, who is 54, says she is cancer-free and now works as a cancer coach. She's teaching me the best food in the form of the best food, that food is the best form of medicine, says one of her clients. It's his cancer, which is brain cancer, has stopped growing now, and he says it's so wonderful, and a huge part of that is the food. Researchers at Harvard University learned of Barrow's success and now will be studying her method. It's exciting, says Barrow. I am now validated. I am no longer the crazy cancer patient. There's a real science that is going on there. And, you know, here's the thing that gets me. Being the crazy cancer patient or being the crazy sick patient, you know, they send you from specialist to specialist when you have issues that aren't easily explained. And everybody has their own little slice of the pie, but doesn't know anything else outside of that. So when you have these multi-layered issues that are happening, you're always the crazy patient. You come in with printed studies that you've been reading that apply to your case. Nobody wants to read it. So it's a very, very frustrating thing. So this is kind of cool that they're going to be looking at it. And it is kind of interesting that she's having a lot of success, though we've always said that inflammation is the root of all disease. And it is what seems to make cancers and abnormal cell cultures flare up. They are looking at our genetics and the genetics of the tumor, says Barrow, and what the outliers did, their attitude, environment, faith, and social support. What we're trying to do is to create a database of all these different things and then look for commonalities between all of these people. The lead Harvard researcher, Dr. Isaac Cohane, says that because the outcomes are so rare, this particular study will take some time to complete. So they're probably going to bury it somewhere. But don't worry about it, because one of the things that you're going to want to do to try to eat healthier, first and foremost, when you start hitting 40s and 50s and your body starts to say, oh, no, 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 is to eat organically. And I believe I mentioned this in the show with Camille, that there is a company out there that manufactures bacteriophages. Remember, we've talked about phages a few times now. And one of the questions on their Q&A page asks, do organically grown foods contain bacteriophages? And they say yes. Oh, remember, they're a green, sustainable solution as opposed to those chemicals. Organically grown foods are likely to contain more phages than do non-organically foods treated with various chemicals, because many chemicals used to improve the safety of foods or to preserve and increase the food's shelf life kills the phages as well as any pathogenic bacteria and potentially beneficial probiotic bacteria as well. So don't wash your sauerkraut in bleach. That's what that's saying. So, you know, you think you're being healthy, you go after organic to get away from the pesticides that cause toxicity, and then you find out that, oh, well, these viruses that are being genetically engineered in some way, shape, or form, or have specialized payloads that specifically target a type of bacteria like Listeria or E. coli. You don't know what this bacteriophage is carrying in its payload. It's whatever has been manufactured as an organic pesticide or a bio, they're calling it a bioreagent or something like that, to kill pathogens on your food. You don't know what's in there, and you don't know how it is going to interact with the chemical processes that are going on inside of your body. All right, so now let's continue. So not only is it on organic food, we found out that it was also being used on lettuce and spinach. And back in 2012, oh, wait a minute, this one is 2006. Never mind, a little 6 years off there. November 2006, out of Gastroenterology Journal, gastrojournal.org, titled FDA approves the use of bacteriophages to be added to your meat and your poultry products. We also read in another story to the pork products as well. August 18th, 2006, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration announced that it had approved the use of bacteriophage preparations made from 6 individually purified phages to be used on ready-to-eat meats and poultry products as an antimicrobial agent against Listeria mycogenes. The ruling came in response to a food additive petition submitted in 2002 from Intralinks, which happens to be the same company that had the Q&A that said that it was also considered organic. And they are out of Baltimore, Maryland, right in the pit of vipers. And they're a biotech company that produces bacteriophages. And I think this is actually where I got their name to then find that Q&A. This marks the very first time that the FDA has regulated the use of phage preparation as a food additive. However, phages are currently approved in the United States for pesticide application, so they're putting on the crops anyway, including use on crops. Well, there you go. And although not currently permitted in the United States, phages are used in other countries as antibiotic therapy regimens. And we did read a story the last time we covered phages about this being the panacea that will protect us from antibiotic-resistant bacteria. The additive that was approved is a mixture of equal proportions of 6 phages with a specific activity against L mycogenes. The petitioners, so it's engineered to whatever they want it to be. The petitioner's rationale for incorporating 6 phages into one formulation is to minimize the possibility of I mutagenes developing a resistance to the individual additive. And I think when we originally looked at the story, that to me states that if it's going to be able to form a resistance, that means it's going to be able to mutate just like any other good virus, like a flu virus. We're going to look at some of that mutation and how it applies to evolution, not only in itself, but also into the co-organisms that it infects, and how it could potentially apply to humans. But remember, bacteriophages are viruses, though very simple ones, and most of them are DNA viruses, but there are a few that are RNA as well, which means that they do not have the second strand that helps to do error correction when it replicates, so it's very unstable. The approved phage preparation is reported to be effective against 170 strains of I mycogenes, and each phage is specific against various strains, including those strains known to be associated with foodborne illnesses. So let's spray it all over our chicken and our beef and our pork and not tell anybody, because it probably doesn't have to be labeled, just like everything else doesn't, like clone meat. All right, so now here's a headline we hit a while back. Bacteriophages, insufficient understanding of phage treatment of human infections. Though we are talking about it, we are talking about using it to protect us against antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Bacteriophages are viruses that kill bacteria, and the question of whether bacteriophages can be used to treat infections in humans. This may be particularly useful when it comes to infections with antibiotic-resistant bacteria. The report shows that current scientific evidence is insufficient to determine whether bacteriophages are actually effective in the treatment of human infections, so we better do more testing. There are also knowledge gaps regarding the phage therapy safety. So let's have a pandemic of some kind. Bacteriophages were discovered in the early 20th century, and they have different modes of action compared to antibiotics. A phage is very specific for one type of bacterium, and it can be programmed as such as well, while antibiotics are effective against multiple strains of bacteria. This prohibits the use of phages in the treatment of acute infections. The causative bacterium has to be identified and cultured before a matching phage or phages can be found, or a cocktail. This process can actually take a few days, so if you have a pandemic X, don't be looking for phages. And because of this particular concern, antibiotics were more successful and phages fell out of favor. So now, let's try and get this next National Institute of Health story to load. Being published out of a publication called Frontiers in Microbiology, April 4th, 2017, phages in the human body. Bacteriophages, viruses that infect bacteria, have reemerged as powerful regulators of bacterial populations in natural ecosystems, and those bacterial populations we have co-evolved with. Phages invade the human body just as they do any other natural environment, to such an extent that they are the most numerous group in the human virome. And this was only recently revealed in metagenic studies, despite the fact that the presence of phages in the human body was reported decades ago. Now we just have to figure out what they do. The influence of the presence of phages in the human body is yet to be evaluated, so we don't even know what they do, so let's add new ones that are unknown through the food supply to the general population and do one big fat experiment. So this is only recently revealed, blah, 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 blah. The influence of the presence of phages in the human body has yet to be evaluated, but as in the marine environment, a clear role in the regulation of bacterial populations could be envisaged that might have impact on human health. Moreover, phages are excellent vehicles of genetic transfer, and they contribute to the evolution of bacterial cells in the human body by spreading and acquiring DNA horizontally. And that's what worries me. You know, they say that our gut and our brain are very well connected. We spent a lot of shows looking at the vagus nerve and that gut-brain connection and how bacteria in the gut can actually help produce chemicals in the brain and affect your mood and your mental status. So the fact that they are messing around with organisms, viruses in particular, in the laboratory that attack things such as E. coli, which lives in our digestive tract, sometimes not in high numbers, because if it is, you'd be sick, but in low numbers, but they still have an effect on your biology. Finally, the presence of phages in human samples, most of which at the time are not considered, can influence and bias microbiological and molecular results. And in view of the evidence, some studies suggest that more attention needs to be paid to their interference in the human body. Well, and this is what I'm saying. The FDA approved in 2006 these viral components in our food supply. And we've been eating it happily and unknowingly. I mean, of course, there was a press release, so you were informed if you paid attention. But we have this explosion of all these different types of immunological diseases and worried about pandemics everywhere. Listen to this. This is again out of PubMed, National Institute of Health, 2004. So they knew this a long time ago. Bacteriophages in autoimmune diseases and other inflammatory conditions. Oh, so maybe this is all these incidences of cancer because there are autoimmune responses going on in response to these foreign organisms, i.e. things like bacteriophages that the body has never seen before, that goes in and infiltrates the gut microbiota, and your gut might also be damaged already, or if not, it will be future with inflammation, so that gut blood barrier doesn't function properly and you end up with leaky gut. And these things can pass into the blood supply. There are several autoimmune diseases and other inflammatory conditions where an infectious etiology is suggested by the epidemiology, the clinical course, and the pathological findings. Many candidate bacteria and viruses have been considered as potential etiological agents, but mostly without firm proof. Bacteriophages are viruses that infect bacteria, and they may be found wherever bacteria is located, but would not be detected unless it was specifically sought. Ding, ding, and nobody looks for these things. They have not previously been considered to be pathogens, but they are now. But bacteriophages are immunogenic and therefore could play a role in the pathogenesis of autoimmune and other inflammatory diseases by acting as antigens on the epithelial surfaces bound to antibodies as immune complexes through molecular mimicry, or as possibly as super antigens. So there you have it. They've been putting this stuff in our food since 2006, but they already knew about the inflammatory and autoimmune effects since 2004. And they didn't think to make that a big public knowledge to the doctors. And not a lot of doctors specialize in autoimmune dysfunction. And I mean, one of the things that inflammation does to the body is not only does it make all your joints hurt and make you extremely tired, but it also can cause inflammation in your arteries. And if you have cholesterol in your body, and I know a lot of people say cholesterol is good, and even the food recommendations took cholesterol off the list of things you should avoid. But too much cholesterol, once that epithelial lining is damaged from high blood pressure, which can also be caused by inflammation to the arteries, the cholesterol can get snagged on it like a loose sweater gets snagged when you rub against a brick wall. And again, all kinds of things that I've learned through doing my research on cardiovascular dysfunction. So, all right, now, we also read a story, or at least a headline, that had talked about a new call from DARPA with these pathogenic predators that are looking to create a force for homeland security and protection against biological threats involving bacterial agents. And because traditional antibiotics aren't working too well anymore, or it could be a cocktail of some sort of pathogenic bacteria, they want to find a newer way to target this bacteria. And the phage happens to be a perfect target for that. So you better keep an eye out on what is going on. If the Department of Defense and Georgie Porgy Church, and we saw that in another story, are tinkering with the same technologies. And if this one will load, I don't know, it's a PDF, and my computer's going, it's a lot. It's a lot. I'm going to start singing Depeche Mode in a minute. Come on. Well, maybe it'll load, or maybe it won't. But there was a story that came up about Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation being involved in using bacteriophages to control the release of carbon in the environment with decomposition of biomass. And the picture on the front of that PDF was very scary. It was a T4 bacteriophage, and if you've never seen one, just plug in T4 and PHAGE in Google, and then go to images and take a look at it. It's a scary little monster. And they made these little nanorobotic programmable phages as well. But there were these little nano robot phages with custom synthetic engineered payloads in their little sac, and I don't remember what that sac is called, that gets injected into the organism it's infecting. Pretty frightening. And here's a story that actually talks about that. Nanobot viruses tag and round up bacteria in your food and water. What is this from? This is March 27th, 2018. So this was a newer story out of sciencenews.org. Tweaking DNA. Oh, yeah, we read this before. And adding nanoparticles creates a new tool to test for contaminants and to bag and tag you. Viruses engineered into nanobots can find and separate bacteria from food or water. So this, again, is going to be sold as a green solution. These viruses, called bacteriophages, or just phages for short, naturally latch onto bacteria to infect them. And by tweaking the phages' DNA and decking them out with magnetic nanoparticles, researchers have created a tool that could corral bacteria and force them to reveal themselves. These modifications can then boost the sensitivity and the speed of rooting out bacterially infected food or water. Researchers reported at the annual American Chemical Society meeting in March of 2018. You're taking on the power of what evolution has done. Ding, ding. Yes, we are going to be gods, and we are tinkering with evolution, and we're going to look more at that to bind bacteria, and then we are just helping that evolution out a little bit, says Sam Nugent, a food and biosystems engineer who leads the team designing these phages at Cornell University. How exciting is that? So they did turn them into little nanobots, and they are targeting whatever they want to target to take it out to direct. It's self-directed evolution, the evolution of the species of the organism. And then let's touch on one more thing about phages, a story that we read a few times about viruses falling from the sky. And this is where we are going to set the stage for the rest of this, because if they put out news that there are millions, if not billions, of viruses falling from the sky every minute of every day in every cubic centimeter, it's the question, what type of viruses could they be? Well, we found out that they were phages. They were viruses that also infect bacteria. And one of the things that they are thinking about these phages falling from the sky is that they even could be potentially affecting evolution of organisms on the planet, because everything, plants and animals, humans, are all infected with these phages. So now where do we go from here? Well, the reason why I spent a lot of time on phages is because they are so tiny, they are so programmable, and there already is an invasion of these things in our environment, whether or not it was accidentally or on purpose, which seemed to be on purpose in our food and maybe even in our water supply. There's no way around it. And I don't even know how to kill them. Maybe high heat, but that's not going to work if they're in your body and running around. All right, well, I am having a load problem, and my browser is flashing. Oh, we might have to do... Oh, now Skype is up. Might have to do the Lonely Elephant. All right, try one more time. All right, we had mentioned on the show Wednesday with Camille something that we had covered a long time ago on the show, and it was something called bovine leukemia virus. And bovine leukemia virus was discovered back in the 70s, to my fear and horror, because it was like in 1976 they discovered that it could actually infect humans, but they never thought to pull it out of the milk supply. In Europe, they ended up culling all of the cows to get it out of the milk and meat supply, but in the United States we did not. And so I wanted to talk about this because people don't realize that there are viruses everywhere, not just bacteriophages, but that was a good illustration as to how far it has gone. But there are viruses everywhere, things that were known and things that were unknown, and things that were not discovered until our technology got better, or so they said. Well, bovine leukemia virus is one of those that weren't discovered until our technology got a little better, or so they said. Decades ago, concern was raised that milk of dairy cows frequently contains a leukemia-causing virus. But they were talking about the bovine leukemia virus, which is the leading cancer killer among dairy cattle. And you're going to find, too, that a lot of cancer actually is caused by viruses, and the first that was discovered happened to be the Epstein-Barr virus. Most U.S. dairy herds are infected with the bovine leukemia virus, and I remember in the National Institute of Health document that I originally read on this, it was almost all herds, whether they were farmed, like factory farmed, or if they were free-range cows. Most of the U.S. dairy herds are infected with bovine leukemia virus. Thus, the question of whether they are releasing the infectious virus into the milk is an important health consideration. So researchers at the University of Pennsylvania decided to put it to the test, and indeed, the infectious virus was demonstrated in the milk of 17 of the 24 cows tested, indicating that humans are often orally exposed to the bovine leukemia virus. But just because we're exposed to it doesn't mean that it's causing human diseases. How do we know the bovine leukemia virus can even infect human cells? Well, we didn't until 1976, when it was discovered that bovine leukemia virus can indeed infect humans, chimpanzees, and monkey cells. And that was even in the pasteurized milk, by the way. Okay, but that still doesn't mean it necessarily causes cancer in other species. So what can you do? Well, you can't lock human infants in a cage and feed them infected milk. But thank goodness you can lock infant chimpanzees in a cage, and they locked Bois and Roger into a cage and fed them infected milk, and they developed leukemia and they died. Well, we didn't even know that chimps could get leukemia, so learned something new. And the fact that bovine leukemia virus infected milk appeared to transit or induce leukemia in our closest living relatives certainly did raise the stakes. But human beings are not chimpanzees, yet our DNA is 98% identical, but we also share 60% of our DNA with a banana. So we need human studies, so let's just let it go into the milk and see what happens. So thanks to the pesky Nuremberg principles, we cannot do human trials, but what about observational studies? Do cattle farmers have higher rates of cancer? Well, apparently so, leading some to suggest that milk and egg-borne viruses may be important in the development of human leukemias and lymphomas. And that's another thing. Viruses are carried in eggs as well, and that happens to be the substrate that they grow most reagents to create vaccines with. But farmers may be exposed to all sorts of other potential carcinogens such as pesticides, and yes, large animal veterinarians do have more leukemias and lymphomas as well, but some were also particularly lax in the use of their X-ray protective gear, so it didn't necessarily have anything to do with viruses. What we need to do are so-called serology studies, and that would be to test people's blood for antibodies against viruses, which would then prove their human exposure, and we got them. 10 different studies looking for bovine leukemia virus antibodies in cancer patients and non-cancer patients, creamery employees versus office employees, veterinarians, unpasteurized milk drinkers, and the whole gamut. And not a single study found an individual with antibodies to bovine leukemia virus. So in 1981, the case was closed. Strong evidence to bovine leukemia virus was not transmissible to people. Yeah, they had to cover their ass and say that. But the strength of the evidence is only as strong as the strength of the test. And Bois and Roger did not develop detectable antibodies either, but yet they died from it. Uh-oh. So the tests back then were also not really sensitive in 1976. So clearly the question of whether bovine leukemia virus poses public health hazard does deserve a thorough investigation using highly sensitive molecular probes, but it would take 20 more years, and hold on one second, because I didn't bring up, I thought this had the whole, oh God, I thought this had the whole solution. All right, here we go. Berkeley News. Oh, I did have this up. Oh, well. Just excuse me. All right, let's load, baby. News.berkeley.edu. Virus in cattle linked to human breast cancer. And this was also a National Institute of Health study that I saw. It was published out of PLOS One. A new study by UC Berkeley researchers, this was September 15th, 2015, so they've known for a few years, establishes for the very first time a link between infection with the bovine leukemia virus and human breast cancer. In the study, published this month in the journal PLOS One and available online, researchers analyzed the breast tissue from 239 women for the presence of bovine leukemia virus, comparing samples from women who had breast cancer with women who had no history of the disease. And they found that 59% of breast cancer samples had evidence of exposure to bovine leukemia virus as determined by the presence of its viral DNA. Now, it's milk and it's mammaries. Now, that's pretty damn frightening. So it probably is some sort of mammary infection. I mean, I don't know exactly what it infects in the cows, but I think that's what Camille had mentioned. But it's some sort of mammary infection that actually goes in and creates an illness. By contrast, 29% of the tissue samples from women who never had breast cancer also showed exposure to the virus. So maybe it will, maybe it won't. Association between bovine leukemia infection and breast cancer was surprising to many previous reviewers of the study, but it's important to note that our results do not prove that the virus caused the cancer. Wink. However, this is the most important first step, and we still need to confirm that the infection with the virus happened before and not after the breast cancer developed, and if so, how? Well, how about in the milk? Bovine leukemia virus infects dairy and beef cattle's blood cells and their mammary tissues. Ding, ding, ding. So no connection there. Don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain. And this retrovirus is easily transmitted among cattle, primarily through infected blood and milk, but it only causes disease in fewer than 5% of the infected animals. It only causes disease, so only fewer than 5% of the infected animals get disease. Otherwise, it stays dormant. In 2007, a U.S. Department of Agriculture survey of bulk milk tanks found that 100% of dairy operations with herds of 500 more cows tested positive for BLV, bovine leukemia virus antibodies. This may not be surprising since milk from one infected cow is mixed in with all of the others. Even dairy operations with small herds of fewer than 100 cows tested positive for bovine leukemia virus 83% of the time. So what had been unclear until recently is whether the virus could be found in humans, something that was confirmed in a study. And studies done in the 70s failed to detect evidence that human infection could happen with BLV. And the tests we have now are way more sensitive, but it was still hard to overturn the established dogma that bovine leukemia virus was not transmissible to humans. And as a result, there's been little incentive for the cattle industry to set up procedures to contain the spread of the virus. So look out, people, because it is in milk and cheese and everything else. The new paper takes the earlier findings a step further by showing a likelihood of the presence of bovine leukemia virus in breast cancer tissue. And when the data was analyzed statistically, the odds of having breast cancer if BLV was present was 3.1 times greater than if it was absent. The odds of this ratio are higher than any of the frequently publicized risk factors for breast cancer, such as obesity, alcohol consumption, and the use of postmenopausal hormones. So bovine leukemia virus, you have a much greater risk of that causing breast cancer than all these other things. There's also the precedence for viral origins of cancer. Hepatitis B virus, that's another one, is known to cause liver cancer, and human papillomavirus, which is HPV, can lead to cervical and anal cancers. Notably, vaccines have been developed for both of those viruses and are routinely used to prevent the cancers associated with them or poison you. So if bovine leukemia virus were proven to cause a breast cancer, it could change the way we currently look at breast cancer control. Yeah, maybe get another vaccine. It could shift the emphasis to prevention of breast cancer rather than trying to cure or control it after it has already occurred. They emphasize that this study does not identify how the virus infected the breast tissue sample in their study, but like they said, it infects the mammary glands of the cows, so why would it not go after the similar cells in the mammary glands of humans? The virus could have come through consumption of unpasteurized milk or undercooked meat, or it could have been transmitted by other humans. Oh, so it's transmissible to other humans, probably through sex or transfusions, I would imagine. Now, that is extremely frightening. Wouldn't that be considered some sort of pandemic if it can jump from an animal to a human, and it could be passed from potentially human to human through fluid contact or even through breastfeeding your child? Oh, how frightening. Shouldn't this be a huge priority? I mean, this is just insane. The University of California Breast Cancer Research Program and the U.S. Department of Defense's the U.S. DOD also has a breast cancer research program, helped fund this research. Yeah. So using viruses for one thing or another that form cancer. And don't worry about it if viruses are falling from the sky. All right, so now let's look at another one that a good 90%. Oh, don't do this to me. I don't want to have to sing I want to call it the lazy elephant. A virus that 90% of the global population is infected with, and we might not even know it because a lot of times it doesn't even show symptoms. And that is called the Epstein-Barr virus, more affectionately known as EBV. All right, this is out of the Cancer Research publication out of the UK. March 26, 2014, 50 years of the Epstein-Barr virus. I'm actually get into a little bit of the history, but the history made me chuckle a bit. In March of 1964, this is actually something that I tested as having a high antibody reading toward, meaning that not only was I infected, but things such as Epstein-Barr can be reactivated because they are DNA viruses. They are part of the herpes family. There's quite a number of the herpes family, which we'll talk about in one of these stories coming up if we don't run out of time. There's a whole bunch of the herpes family, just like chickenpox, that can infect you for life, and they can be dormant after an initial infection, which you might be sick from or maybe not, and then be reactivated years later from things such as stress or inflammation, or they can also damage your immune system, which then causes you to get other infections of some kind that happen to be opportunistic. Epstein-Barr virus also was the first cancer-causing virus that was discovered in the laboratory back in the 1960s. And if you remember, the Department of Defense was doing research into cancer viruses back during the days of the Cuban Missile Crisis as well. In March 1964, the Lancet Medical Journal published a remarkable piece of research from 3 scientists named Anthony Epstein, Yvonne Barr, and Bert Achong. They had discovered the first human virus that can cause cancer, which later came to bear 2 of their names, the Epstein-Barr virus. So the story is it came out of Africa. Of course it did. The story of Epstein-Barr, more affectionately known as EBV, and its role in cancer began with the work of a surgeon called Dennis Brickett. So shouldn't it be called Brickett's virus? World War II He was posted in Africa and subsequently settled in Uganda for a few years to practice medicine. And in 1958, Burkitt reported the first specific type of cancer that was common in young children living across Central Africa. These aggressive tumors that were later named Burkitt's lymphoma were caused by white blood cells multiplying out of control. The children were often brought to the hospital with dental problems or swelling in the face and neck, and the tumors grew rapidly, and sadly, they did not respond to any treatments available at that time. Thanks in part to funding from the British Empire Cancer Campaign, a predecessor of Cancer Research UK, which is the publication we're reading from now, Burkitt was able to continue his research and study the children who developed this new type of cancer in more precise detail. He noticed that although no single tribe of African children was more affected, there was a very strong geographical pattern that matched particularly rainy areas with high year-round temperatures. This strong link to environmental conditions, very similar to the pattern of malaria, led Burkitt and his colleagues to believe that a lymphoma was being transmitted by an insect-borne virus, but he had no evidence to back up his theory. Well, there you go. So, March 22nd, 1961, Burkitt then went to England and gave a lecture at a London medical school detailing the findings for other doctors and scientists. And listening to his lecture, titled The Commonest Children's Cancer in Tropical Africa, a Hitherto Unrecognized Syndrome, was a young cancer research UK doctor named Anthony Epstein. Epstein had a particular interest in understanding disease using tests carried out in the lab, and he was an expert using a new and very powerful tool called the electron microscope. He had been working on the Rosas sarcoma virus that caused tumors in chickens and understood how viruses could drive the development of cancer in some circumstances. He was determined to be the first to find a cancer-causing virus in humans, and it was greatly excited by Burkitt's theory that his new type of lymphoma might be linked to a virus. So following that lecture, the pair talked over tea and arranged some samples of the tumor to be taken from children with Burkitt's lymphoma and shipped from Uganda to Epstein's lab in London. And this is kind of long-winded, but after a few long, frustrating years trying to find virus samples, Epstein made a breakthrough thanks to poor weather conditions. Fog caused his samples to be diverted to another airport because of the longer journey. Some of the cells from the tumors shook free, and alongside a young researcher who joined his lab was Yvonne Barr. They finally managed to grow these free-floating cancer cells to study. And with the help of a colleague, the eureka moment finally came when they looked at Burkitt's lymphoma cells under the electron microscope and saw that they were filled with tiny virus particles. So Epstein's discovery, although groundbreaking, was just the first step in a long, baffling road ahead. He and his team set up a joint project, and in 1965 confirmed that Epstein had spotted a brand new human virus, and it was officially christened the Epstein-Barr virus. But there was a problem. Under the microscope, it appeared that only every 100 cells from Burkitt's tumors were infected with EBV, and some tumor samples had no detectable virus at all. Oh, look, it sounds very stealthy to me. This cast serious doubts on the theory that the virus was causing the cancer. So undeterred, their team carried out further experiments, and they found that infected cells, a type of white blood cell called a B cell, could transmit the virus to uninfected B cells and cause them to become cancerous. This was positive evidence in favor of their virus theory, so they kept pursuing this line of research, and eventually they had proof they needed when a blood test was developed that could detect infected cells. Satisfyingly, all the children with Burkitt's lymphoma tested positive for EBV infection. Now, that's what scares me. So, much to their shock, so did 9 out of every 10 living adults in America, none of whom had ever had Burkitt's lymphoma. Surprise! So what is going on? Well, the answer came after a lab technician became ill with what at that time and with what my mother had was called glandular fever. And I also found that this can be passed through the placenta, by the way. So the fact that I had it when I was 15 means that it could still be in my body, and I might have passed it on to my kid. So the worker in the lab became ill with glandular fever. Before her illness, she had always tested negative for EBV, but afterwards she tested positive. It was the smoking gun, and larger studies confirmed that every single case of glandular fever, which was a widespread disease, was caused by an EBV infection. And it's also known as mono. If anyone had mono in high school, you'll know. So one fundamental question remained, and that was whether or not this infection caused the Burkitt's lymphoma. Was a disease creating a nice pool of cells for the virus to infect, or if it was a mere coincidence? Well, they proved that it was true. So finally, the mystery fell into place in 1976, and that was when the Karolinska Institute in Sweden studied the chromosomes and cells from the Burkitt lymphoma, and one chunk broke off and reattached to another cell, and it turned out to be a part of the Epstein-Barr virus. So where are we going to go from here? Come on, my page isn't loading, and I want to crank through a couple more of these stories because it continues on with the horror of viruses and things that they can do to your body, and you might even not know that you have them because nobody's ever tested for them. Come on. All right. So this one is out of a doctor's publication, Dr. Will Cole, April 11th, 2016, titled 4 Common Viruses That Can Trigger Thyroid, Autoimmune, and Brain Problems. Now, there's some of you out there that liked my techno babble shows, as evidenced by a comment on one of the shows, versus talking about infections and things of that nature. But I'm trying to take you guys on a journey of things that I've been researching in my own personal journey to try to get better from things that I'm suffering from that have never actually been able to be explained, though I'm having a lot more insight by doing my own research. But because of these things that are happening to me, some of you know and some of you may not, I finally decided that I'm going to have to pull the plug on not only UCY.TV, which saddens me a great deal, but also on Before the First Cup for a while. I did sign up for a Spreaker account, and it's Spreaker.com/Before the First Cup. And at some point, probably once school starts back up again, I will record some episodes once the weather gets crappy and I don't get to go outside every day. But until then, I'm going to need to focus the next few months on trying to get a handle on all of my issues and potential cures for them. So I hope everybody has enjoyed what we have done over the last 7 years, but honestly, it's so exhausting for me, and there's so many things going on, and it's just so complicated, and there's so many studies that none of my doctors have ever seen, and I'm trying to enlighten them as well, that pulling the plug is going to have to become something that I have to do. And I mean, it's something that I really enjoy. It's my good outlet, so I'm not even going to have an outlet. I have to like turn my whole life upside down and become not a Jesus freak, but just about as a health freak, and just try and do a lot of things differently. So I just hope you guys understand that. All right, so here we go. So I'm taking you on a journey with me to understand some of the things I've learned. 4 common viruses that can trigger thyroid, autoimmune, and brain problems, all 3 of which are things that I have issues with. All right. Some top health issues that I coach people about around the world, and this is this Dr. Will Cole, are thyroid problems, autoimmune conditions, and brain issues such as anxiety, depression, and fatigue. And I don't know about the anxiety, though this show causes me anxiety sometimes reading about this stuff. But definitely depression and fatigue. I have been pretty sad lately and pretty tired, so it's been difficult to get going on a daily basis. So it is this doctor's passion and his life mission to get to the root of these issues that impact his patient's health. He has written in the past about how the microbiome issues, such as leaky gut syndrome, we've talked about that before, toxins, poor diet, and that is just not poor diet as in cheeseburgers. That is poor diet as in anything that you're not getting your nutrients from. But if you have leaky gut syndrome, you're not digesting foods properly, which can lead to poor nutrition, as well as stress, can be pieces of the puzzle of chronic health problems. I haven't talked directly, though, about another piece of the puzzle until now, and that would be the viral connection. Viral infections can range from the common cold to HIV to hepatitis or to chickenpox or things like that. And viruses are oftentimes the underlying missing link to triggering many health conditions. I'm not talking about acute viral infections like the flu, though it could be the case. What I'm thinking about are chronic viral infections, long-standing infections that wreak havoc on your immune system and your health months or years later in life. The viral infections that I see most are actually part of the same family, and that would be the herpes family of virus. When most people hear the word herpes, they think of sexually transmitted diseases or cold sores. But there are actually 8 identified members of the herpes family so far, though many in the integrative health world would consider there to be even more varieties. This is also a group of viruses that causes chickenpox as well as shingles. The herpes family is one rough family. The 4 members of the herpes family that I see the doctor as an underlying trigger with seemingly unrelated health problems happen to be the Varicella zoster virus, and that's the VCZV, also known as the herpes human virus 3 or HHV3, and that is the one that causes chickenpox and shingles. The second is the Epstein-Barr virus, EBV, also known as HHV4. The third is the cytomegalovirus, also known as CMV-HHV5. And the last is the human herpes type 6 virus, also known as the HHV6, and I don't know what that one causes. But then there's the HPVs as well that he doesn't even mention here, that can cause cervical cancers. Almost all of us have one or more of these viruses in our body, so the variable is not if we have it and when it will be triggered, but when. And it might not happen for years,